Hello, I'm Jim McIntyre and welcome to Wellbeing Wednesday. We are going to continue a little mini series that we've been doing as part of this series on getting help. So, this is part 3 of that little mini series. On the previous parts, we've discussed the types of help available and what might be some indications that you would benefit from getting help from a professional. Seeing a counselor or a therapist for the first time can be kind of intimidating and uncomfortable if you don't know what to expect. It actually can be kind of intimidating and uncomfortable even if you do know what to expect, but knowing what it might look like can be helpful. So, I want to talk a bit about what a first session might look like if you're seeing a professional, and bust a few common misunderstandings and misconceptions as we go. Rather than going back and forth between terms of different kinds of professionals, I'm just going to stick to the term of counsellor. But really, this is what a first session might look like for a lot of different professionals. It might not look exactly like this, but it's likely to contain aspects of this. And obviously, different counsellors work differently. So, what I'm going to share is not going to apply to every single counsellor or anything like that, but there's some things that generally a first session will include. And generally, the first session with any of these professionals will be different to subsequent sessions. So, whether you're meeting with a counsellor online or in person, the initial part's obviously going to be a little bit different. If you're meeting in person, you're likely going to be waiting in a waiting room and be given some sort of initial information paperwork to fill out, much like a medical appointment. And this is information that the counsellor legally needs to have in order to work with you, such as next of kin in case of emergency, and all those kind of details. Many professionals will let you know how that information is being stored and secured, but you also obviously have the right to ask for that information at any time. Then, as you're called into the counsellor's office, it's unlikely to be a couch that you lay down on, which has sometimes been how it's classically portrayed in the media. But it is more likely to be a couch or a seat facing another couch or a seat, maybe with a coffee table in between. Counsellors are just going to be doing their best to create an atmosphere and environment that feels inviting and safe. Lots of professionals will let the client choose which side they sit on, and this is not some form of sneaky personality test. It's just because they want clients to be comfortable. Many people are nervous when beginning counselling, and that is totally normal. It is normal to be a little bit nervous, a little bit apprehensive when you're going in to have your first appointment. The effectiveness of counselling is based in large part on the relationship between the counsellor and the client. The client feeling safe, feeling heard, and being able to share, they're all vital parts for the healing process. So, for a counsellor, building rapport, building that relationship is really essential. And a large part of the first session is going to be for that purpose, for introducing yourself and for getting to know each other a little bit. For a counsellor, the goal of the first session is to begin to get to know their client, to get an idea of how to proceed. As well as there's some things that they legally need to share with the client, and informed consent needs to be established. So most counsellors are going to begin with those things, which might look like everything you say here is confidential. The only time we would breach that confidentiality is if I felt there was risk of harm to yourself, others, or in the case of harm to children. The other thing to be aware of is, which not every counsellor will mention, some might, is that as counsellors in Australia, we legally have to be receiving supervision. And part of supervision is talking about cases, but this is done in a way that obscures details of the client and still protects confidentiality. They may also in this time share some specifics about their organisation with the client, and will likely ask if the client has any questions and if they're happy to proceed. So after that, the counsellor is likely to begin asking the client questions. I personally like to start with asking the counsellor if they've had any counselling in the past, and many professionals will do this. The reason is we obviously all come into anything with expectations of what it might look like, and it's the same with counselling. We would come in with expectations of what it might look like. I remember one of my first times having counseling, and I was frustrated that I was just getting asked so many questions and I wasn't given any advice because I didn't understand that that's not the role of a counselor. Counselors don't give advice, counselors are there to listen, and asking questions is a big part of it. So I will ask if someone's had previous experience with counseling, because if they've had a positive or negative experience, they can be kind of carrying that into the session. And asking about that can let me know if there's expectations or things I need to be aware of. For example, a client might say that they've had a negative experience with counseling, and might be like, it was a negative experience, they wanted me to forgive my father, and I'll never forgive him. Then I know, okay, probably it's best for me not to talk about their father, at least initially. They might say something similar to the example I used previously of feeling like a counselor just wants to ask questions when you're wanting to be told what you should do. Then I get to explain to that client that that's not a counselor's role. It's not to give advice. The other initial question that counselors will ask in an initial session will be something along the lines of, what brings you to counseling today? Or what are your symptoms? What brought you to therapy? What do you feel is wrong in your life? They may also ask some questions about your history, including your childhood, education, relationships, current living situation, and your career. And the reason for that is it's really all connected in our well-being. But it is important for you to know that you don't have to talk about anything you don't want to talk about. If there's an area that you feel uncomfortable discussing, you can tell the counsellor that, and unless they're a bad counsellor, they will leave that area alone, unless in a subsequent session it becomes apparent that it's connected to the issue that you want to deal with, and then they may ask your permission to go there. You also definitely do not need to go deep into a trauma or a horrible thing in the first session. You can wait till you feel comfortable, or even simply talk about the emotions at some point without talking about the actual event. Sometimes people get very anxious before going into their first session of counseling because they feel like they're going to have to tell all about this horrible situation that happened to them. You definitely don't need to do that straight off the bat, if at all. It definitely can be helpful sometimes, but you can work up to it. You can wait till you feel safe. The counsellor should focus on the issue that you say you want to work on. They may work collaboratively with you to clarify that issue and to set some goals, and that may also happen over subsequent sessions. Typically, at the end of the first session, the counsellor will suggest how they would like to proceed, how many sessions you might be meeting for, and then you have the opportunity to agree with that or say no to that. They may talk about what kind of counselling modality they would like to use with you, and they'll hopefully leave room for you to ask some questions about that. So here's a couple last thoughts on the initial session. Don't expect to feel vastly different necessarily after the first session. Counseling is a process of healing. It's not a one and done approach. As I mentioned, the first session is really about building relationship and beginning to clarify the issue and beginning to create a plan. That means you may or may not make what seems like a lot of progress in that initial session. Give it a few sessions. Also, you don't need to worry about what to talk about with the counsellor. It's actually their job to guide the conversation, not yours. So you don't need to have a plan going in. They will guide it. Also, don't worry about the counsellor. You don't need to worry about whether they can handle your emotions or if they're tired of taking care of people. It's actually their job. They have strategies, tools, and supervisors to take care of them. You don't need to worry about them. And if you find yourself worrying about taking care of the counsellor, it's likely a defense mechanism and about you, not about them. Also, not every counsellor will be the right fit for everyone. A big part of successful counselling is feeling comfortable with the counsellor, which may come over time. But if after a few meetings you're not clicking, you definitely have the choice to seek out help from someone else. The National Alliance on Mental Illness recommends asking yourself the following questions to determine whether a counsellor is a good fit for you. Here's the questions. Do they challenge you? Do they check in with you? Do they guide you to your goals? Do they help you learn? Do they show acceptance and compassion? And do they treat you as an equal? So if you were to have a few sessions with a counsellor and you were to answer no to any of those questions, it's probably a good idea to consider changing counsellors. You can just tell them at the end of the session that you want to change counsellors, um, or you could just send them an email or a text. They may ask why, uh, because it's typically helpful for them to know why, and you can just answer honestly and say you just don't feel like the dynamic is working, you just don't feel like you're clicking, or you can even say you don't want to tell them. That's totally okay. And in most cases, the counselor should be a professional and should be able to recommend someone who might be a better fit for you. So we finish these talks with a what do we do? And so what do we do is pretty simple this time. We kind of said this last week, but what we do is explore whether counselling would benefit you. It's been a tough year for many people, and many, if not all of us, have been impacted in our mental health in some way. One positive that has come out of this pandemic has been the rise in phone and face to screen counselling. So there's plenty of options available for getting help if that is something that you feel like you would benefit from. So what do we do is just be open to receiving help and think about whether it might be good for you in this season. And hopefully now you know what that might look like were you to go and seek help. So uh, next week we are going to, it's my hope to maybe answer some questions. And if we don't have any questions, we're going to start to talk about depression. So if you have any questions, feel free to email them to us or just drop them in the comments here. Would specifically love questions about counseling, what that process is like, or just any area of mental health or anxiety, which we've also been talking about. So if you have any questions, you can email them or you can just put them in the comments. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be back next week.